We're in 2 Kings chapter 20, the last part of it anyway, verses 12 through 21. So last time we looked at the first half with his sickness and his trust is illustrated once again, which is the defining character that the narrator of the Kings gives us at the beginning of his reign. And now we talked about how at the beginning of this chapter there's a great moment of faith where he trusts in God and takes his problems there, and then he turns around and makes a really big goof. And so let's begin in verse 12. It says, "At that time, Merodach-Baldan, the son of Baldan, king of Babylon, sent envoys with letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he had heard that Hezekiah had been sick. And Hezekiah welcomed them, and he showed them all the treasure of his house, the silver and gold and the spices and the precious oil, his armory, and all that was found in his storehouses. There was nothing in his house or in all his realm that Hezekiah did not show. Then Isaiah the prophet came to King Hezekiah and said to him, 'What did these men say, and from where did they come to you?' Hezekiah said, 'They have come from a far country, from Babylon.' He said, 'What have they seen in your house?' And Hezekiah answered, 'They have seen all that is in my house. There's nothing in my storehouses that I did not show them.' Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, 'Hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days are coming that all that is in your house, which your fathers have stored up till this day, shall be carried to Babylon, and nothing shall be left, says the Lord. And some of your own sons who will come from you, and whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon.' Then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, 'The word of the Lord that you have spoken is good.' For he thought, why not, if there will be peace and security in my days? The rest of the deeds of Hezekiah and all his might, and how he made the pool and the conduit and brought water into the city, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And Hezekiah slept with his fathers, and Manasseh his son reigned in his place." All right, so it says that Merodach-Baldan, who was, it says king of Babylon, but he had been kind of a puppet, basically. So for an example, for those who are doing the Bible study plan, in Joshua, and you see the king of Jericho, say, send spies, or sends, you remember he sends them to Rahab's house in chapter 2 when he hears that spies have been there. So when you hear king, we have connotations of king over a great realm. King can be used far more loosely, okay? King of Jericho, he was kind of king over that city and some of the region that surrounded it. More like, probably a more fair term would be something like a governor. He's really not just the guy who's in control, okay? And that's the same thing true here. Merodach-Baldan was, historically speaking, he was someone who caused problems. And it seems that when you look at what's happening here and you place it into Babylonian history, that what is going on is Merodach-Baldan is trying to create another revolt. He had been exiled and then returned, and he's going to be exiled again shortly thereafter. But it seems that this is one of the things that plays into that. It would seem that when he sends them to him and he's sick and they want to see what all is in his house, it would seem like they're trying to build an alliance with one another. Okay? So when you're when you're building an alliance, especially amongst nations, especially in that time, it is very easy for a nation to lie to you and say, yeah, we've got this, and this that we can contribute to the war effort. It's another thing to actually have that and to be able to produce it when it is needed. And so the inspection of all the goods that are in Hezekiah's house are basically a way of validating, it would seem, the claim that he had the power to help them in this war and as they tried to throw off Assyria in the process. And so there's an alliance that's brewing, and that seems to be what is going on. And that's why when Isaiah comes to him, which it's just interesting how that he has avoided alliances and trusted God, which is what God had wanted him to do exactly. And now at the end, he's working on an alliance. And so he's basically undoing everything he's done, seeking out an alliance instead of leaving the legacy of trust that he should have. So then Isaiah sends this message from Hezekiah that we read that says, Behold, the days are coming, then all that is in your house which your fathers have stored up, even to this day, will be carried to Babylon, and nothing shall be left. And even some of your own family, they will be taken into the courts of Babylon. Now, that is very significant for us as far as what we are studying next, because when we open up Daniel, we're going to see, the first thing we're going to meet is the fulfillment of this. Okay, so listen, I want to read a few verses in Daniel 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand and some of the vessels of the house of God, and brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. The king commanded Ashpenaz, the chief of the eunuchs, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youth and without blemish, good in appearance, skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned to them a daily portion of food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank, and they were to be educated for 3 years. And at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. That's the way Daniel opens, with the fulfillment of everything that's been said here. His goods, and not just his goods, but part of the king's responsibility was building up the temple and making sure things were met in the treasury. So every one of those things are taken off and put in the house of the god of Babylon, which most likely was Marduk. And then Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or as they're more commonly known, we call Daniel by his Hebrew name. His Babylonian name was Belteshazzar. But on the flip side of that, we refer to his friends by their Babylonian names. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were their Babylonian names. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were their God-given names, Israelite names. And we'll talk about that when we get in Daniel. There's some significance to what's going on there. But anyway, this is the beginning. I mean, the end is coming, and it's coming quickly. We're already being told that this is going to happen within a few generations. They're going to be moving into captivity. And so the king of Babylon and Isaiah. Now, the thing that for me is the most puzzling out of all of this are the words of Hezekiah when he hears that all of the goods are going to be taken away, when he hears that his children are going to be taken away in captivity. He says, verse 19, Hezekiah said to Isaiah, "The word of the Lord that you have spoken is good." For he thought, why not, if there will be peace and security in my days? The news itself is monumentally bad news. You're going to be destroyed. Your nation that you love and that you lead is going to be destroyed. Your family is going to be taken away. Everything you have is going to be taken away. And he says, well, at least it won't happen to me. That's just bad, okay? But if I'm honest, sometimes we have to be careful because we can do the same things. We can... I think about it really when it comes to church work. We kind of kick cans down the road and make them, instead of tackling the problems head on and solving them, we just pass them on to the next generation. It's your problem, you'll have to deal with it. For me as a parent, that just seems kind of problematic. Why wouldn't I go ahead and tackle the things that need to be tackling that I could so that they can tackle things that arise in their day? Just saying, well, I don't want to have to go through the uncomfortable nature of it. I don't want to have to deal with the things that are going on. I want things to be peaceful in my day, and I'll let somebody else worry about that. So I'm willing to let things continue to progress out of control or to digress just as long as I don't have to deal with it, and I'll just leave it to my kids. That's just not wise leadership in general, to say, well, it's not my problem, and I'm not going to be around to see it. Well, I'm leading right now. It is my problem. I can't say it's going to be their problem. If I'm leading right now, my job as a leader is to attack the problem as it is now. And it reminds me of a statement. I don't remember where I was reading it over the last month or two, but it talked about the danger, basically, of the decisions that we make now and the consequences they have in the future. And usually by that I mean the future that will outlive us. Okay, how does that work? We need to think more long term in our decision making. It may help us momentarily, and it may relieve the pressure momentarily, but it may create a whole new set of problems. And so it's not just about being pragmatic, what can solve the problem and make me comfortable again in the moment, but is it going to, in the future, create even bigger problems? And that's something we have to be conscious of, because we're looking not just to solve problems, but to be able to solve them in the long term, in the long run. And some of the decisions that we make, even some of the things that we say, well, we're going to let go, we're not going to make a big deal about, and I can understand that to a degree, but at other times I think, okay, I'm not going to make a big deal about it, even though I have some qualms about what's going on. The next generation behind me, they're not going to have any qualms whatsoever because they've never heard an opposite side of it. And so they're just going to rush headlong into it. So my decision to not speak or not speak up and address it, actually, that's what we're seeing. That's what you see in societies. So societies have governing principles in them. And one of the things we're seeing right now in American society is even those people in the last century, especially influential philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and, well, not Muggeridge, he came around later. Sartre and his existentialism, and several other philosophers, and for some reason they're all evading me at the moment. But they kind of were trying to direct us away from Christianity, and they didn't even realize that there were Christian presuppositions that were embedded in their thinking. They took certain things for granted because there were Christian presuppositions in them. Okay, but they were teaching them to a generation that did not have those Christian presuppositions. And whether they admitted it or not, those Christian presuppositions restrained them as they practiced what they were teaching. But when you teach a generation who does not have those presuppositions, what is there to restrain them? They're going to follow it to its logical end. And that's what we're seeing right now in American society. You have a generation that doesn't have a basic Christian understanding of things, as even the previous atheistic group did. And now we're running to far extremes because there is no governing principle in them. And so I say that to say this about how we help the church and pass on things in the church to the next generation. Someone says, well, I don't want to be difficult about that. But here's the thing, the coming generation needs to have it on their radar that there is a different point of view. They need to have it on their radar that this might be a bigger deal than I'm thinking it is. And if nobody ever says anything, they'll rush headlong into something that may be a monumental disaster. And so when it comes to this and leadership, we have to really think about the consequences that outlive us. The seeds that we're sowing now that are going to bear fruit that we're never going to see. That's what we have to be really cautious about. And Hezekiah's response to me is just wildly puzzling, that he could just look at it and say, well, it won't be my problem. Okay. So there are a lot of things moving there, but that to me, when I looked at this text, that was the big thought that just jumped at me, other than it's a big transition moment. And what we're going to see now in chapter 21, which I don't have a slide for, is that Hezekiah makes that decision, and now we're going to read about Manasseh. And Manasseh is the straw that breaks the camel's back. As a matter of fact, by the time when Manasseh is done, God's mind has been made up. Okay, so the Bible talks about, for an example, before, when God was making all these promises to Abraham for the people of Israel, his descendants, to come into the land, he told Abraham that he could not give him the promised land yet because the iniquity of the Amorites was not yet full. They had not reached a level of evil to where God would be just in taking away what they had. They would, but they had not reached it yet. Okay? And so sometimes the Bible speaks of evil as kind of filling up a container or reaching. For an example, the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 18 and 19, they had reached to heaven finally. Or as Amos would say, for 3 transgressions and for 4. You see, the cup is full. And now it's time to remove. And there's a tipping point in which that cup is full and then it starts to spill over. And by the point it starts to spill over, that's when destruction happens. And what we see here in Manasseh's reign, which, by the way, Manasseh will be the most wicked king that Israel or that Judah ever has. And unfortunately, he'll be the longest reigning king that Judah ever had. 55 years, Uzziah had 51. Uzziah was good, Manasseh. What we'll see in the coming chapters is they will look back at Manasseh and say, he was the one. God decided it doesn't matter who comes after him. Because his grandson, Josiah, was going to be arguably the greatest king Judah ever had. And was going to try and purge everything, but even God told him, he said, look, he said, you're doing the right thing, your heart was tender. I'm not going to let it happen while you're king, but it's too late. You've gone too far. The nation has gone too far. And Manasseh is the one that pushed it over the edge. And so that's what we're seeing here. So let's look at chapter 21 and begin reading. It says, Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hephzibah, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Now listen to this category of sins he starts pouring out. According to all the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. For he rebuilt the high places that Hezekiah his father had destroyed. He erected altars for Baal and an Asherah, and Ahab the king of Israel had done. He worshipped all the host of heaven. All right, stop there. So his sins, his idolatry is categorized by these 3 things. Number 1, it was worse than the nations of the people, than the people of the nations that they destroyed, the Amorites, to take the land. So God used Israel to destroy the people as punishment for their sins. The people that were in the land before the Israelites. Okay? Now, the Israelites have exceeded their wickedness. They're doing the same things, and that's what he's fixing to show. And so now they're doing things that caused God to give them the promised land in the first place. Surely the same thing is going to happen to them. I mean, it has to, in the justice of God. And so then it says, he rebuilt the high places. You remember Hezekiah was a reformer. He destroyed all of that. He starts rebuilding the high places for them to worship. He rebuilds them for Baal and for Asherah. Asherah is the female version. These are all fertility gods and goddesses. And it reminds you of Ahab. And he even attaches it. He said, as Ahab had done, the most wicked king in Israel, the 10 northern tribes. And so the writer of the Kings is trying to show us something about Manasseh when he compares him with the idolatry of other nations and when he compares him with wicked King Ahab. Okay? And then he's going to take it even a step further, and he says he worshiped all the host of heaven and served them, which was more of an Assyrian practice than it was anything, from what I understand anyway, that to worship the stars. Man has always had an obsession with the stars, with the creation. And I mean, if you're honest, there's something, I mean, they're majestic. I mean, the Bible paints them that way. The stars are majestic. They're just inanimate objects, or they're not, well, yeah, to a degree, inanimate objects, really. They have some life, but not life that can produce the creation or human life. And so it says he goes on to serve them. And then in verse 4, he takes it even a step further and says, he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, in Jerusalem I will put my name. And he built altars for all the hosts of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord. Okay, we'll stop there because it's going to take it a step further. So now he's not only worshiping them and putting their high places back, he's taking the images of other gods and bringing them into the temple. The place that we spent so much time discussing in 1 Kings 6, 7, and 8 when Solomon was building it, that was specifically set apart for God, you're bringing other gods and setting them in there. And by the way, there's supposed to be an image that when we read this, we recoil. Because the images of Baal and Asherah, they're fertility gods. So the images reflected human anatomy. I can be more descriptive if I need to, but understand it reflected human anatomy in fertility gods. So here you have an altar by which you offer a sacrifice to the God of heaven, and here, next to it, you have a representation of male and female reproductive anatomy. We're supposed to be jarred by that. We're supposed to be disgusted by that. That you would exalt something, as Paul would say in Romans 1, you start worshiping the creature more than the creator. His creation more than the one who made it. Now, he takes it even further in verse 6. He burned his son as an offering and used fortune-telling and omens and dealt with mediums and with necromancers, or people like 1 Samuel 28, the witch at Endor, who would supposedly communicate with the dead. And he did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. And so he offers his child as one of the sacrifices, which we've already seen before. But it doesn't make it any less detestable. God had already said long before Manasseh was ever born, I don't want this happening. I don't want you sacrificing your children to me. And so the sins just keep piling, and he's dealing with fortune tellers and omens and mediums and people who supposedly can communicate with the dead, which they cannot, by the way. People say, well, what about 1 Samuel 28? She calls up Samuel. Yeah, but if you read that story, nobody is more shocked that Samuel shows up than she is, because she knows she can't do it. Okay? So then in verse 7 it says, and carved an image of Asherah that he had made and set it in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said to David and Solomon his son, in this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. And I will not cause the feet of Israel to wander any more out of the land that I gave to their fathers, if only they will be careful to do according to all that I have commanded them, and according to all the law that my servant Moses commanded. But they did not listen, and Manasseh led them astray to do more evil than the nations had done, whom the Lord destroyed before the people of Israel. And we'll see this statement again a little bit later. Now, but this phrase here that says Manasseh led them astray to do more evil. So we've had comparisons to the nations before. We've had comparisons to Ahab. We've had comparisons to Assyrian astrology. And now we've got a final comparison to Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. The first king of the 10 northern tribes. And we said it then and we've seen it continuously. When Jeroboam is brought up, there's always a tagline attached to his name. Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who caused all Israel to sin. Now Manasseh has become like that. He has combined the two worst kings Israel ever had. He is the embodiment of both Ahab and Jeroboam. And you get him for 55 years. Bad effects. So, we'll pick up there hopefully next week and move. And you might look at, by the way, 2 Chronicles 30. Read 2 Chronicles 33, because Kings paints him in all negative, and the Chronicles has a positive spotlight, which we'll get into hopefully next time.